Well, hello and welcome back. Today I want to review the AP video number 18. We're talking about finding evidence and how to find evidence and creating claims and finding concrete evidence to support those claims. So why don't we begin? All right, so what we're going to talk about then is how we pull concrete evidence. And really here I kind of actually want to talk about the mechanics of doing that because as you know, you are taking the test on a computer this year, which means you'll be staring at a computer screen probably instead of a piece of paper. And it's harder to annotate. It's harder to circle things that you think might be interesting when you're reading and that sort of thing. So the whole point of this is to kind of give you a method for finding out that information. All right, so in the video they talked about one method for doing this is like this 3x3 sort of thing. So let's kind of see what that is. As you are reading, it makes sense to copy down some things that you notice that might be interesting. You've read the prompt, so what do you notice that might that might deal with that prompt? Then you look at how it's conveyed, and then finally talk about why it's important. Right, so you notice, maybe you notice something about a character. Well, how is this thing about the character conveyed? Well, it's through its dialogue, it's through its characterization. Write down quotes in there. Well, why is it important? Well, it helps to highlight this complexity in a relationship or something like that. Later on in the video, I will give you an example. All right. Now, the other thing they talked about, and this is something I've heard a lot about essays, about texts. Does it have a beginning, middle, and an end? And I think that's stupid because everything has a beginning, middle, and end. But it highlights the fact that any text you read is going to have some sort of dynamic movement, right? It's not just going to be a single thing. But as we look at the beginning, the middle, and the end of a text, or maybe it's the beginning and the end of the text, or maybe it's the beginning and the first part of the middle and the second part of the middle and the end of the text, or something like that, right? You're recognizing movement, and so you're taking that text and you're chunking it. Now, it just so happens that the text you were supposed to look at for today, the way I looked at it, it does kind of break up into three parts. And you have a part that's talking about Mr. Allworthy, and you have a part that's talking about that's really about Ms. Wilkins, and then finally a part you go back to Allworthy, basically ignoring everything that Ms. Wilkins has said. At which point, when she's been told to do something else, she goes ahead and does it. But what we can do with this beginning, middle, and end is then put in that into the what, how, and why questions, right? And so this is the 3x3 sheet that you got that was attached to yesterday's assignment, and that you could use. You could decide to use this on the actual day of the test. So what I did, and what you should have done as well is you took a look at the 2001 prose analysis question. And it was, this passage is taken from the novel Tom Jones, which is an 18th century novel by the English novelist and playwright Henry Fielding. In the scene, which occurs in the novel, Squire Allworthy discovers an infant in his bed. Read the passage carefully, then in a well-organized essay, analyze the techniques that Fielding employs in the scene to characterize Mr. Allworthy and Mrs. Deborah Wilkins. And I think this is kind of rare because it just says, what are the techniques? And I think that was kind of a trap for people that year, because if you just look at the techniques and don't bring any more interpretation or meaning to it, I think that you set yourself up to do kind of middle of the road. Anyway, let's look at that sheet. So this is the sheet that was there. So what's the task? It's to analyze the techniques that Fielding employs in this scene to characterize Allworthy and Wilkins. What questions do I need to address to effectively answer the prompt? What is their relationship? How is it communicated? Why does it matter? What does it suggest meaning-wise? So the thesis: in the passage from Tom Jones, Henry Fielding contrasts Mr. Allworthy, a good-natured and kind-hearted man, with the prim and proper Mrs. Wilkins, leading to a situation where the arbitrary rules and judgments of society are ignored to express compassion for a small child. Right, and so I came up with that because I look at Mr. Allworthy, and he seems like this really morally good guy, and Mrs. Wilkins, who seems concerned about society, seems concerned about the rules, seems concerned about how she will be seen, what is proper. But in the end, with that that contrast in their personalities and what they care about, we see Mr. Allworthy winning out and him kind of ignoring her in a situation where they do what what I would call the morally correct thing instead of what is the legal or socially correct thing. All right, so the order of argument, right, which is your line of reasoning. And I break it up just like the text breaks it up. Characterize Allworthy, characterize Wilkins, and then analyze meaning in Allworthy's ignoring Wilkins' suggestions and judgments. So what meaning do we get from that? Okay, this part here, I didn't actually fill anything out. It's just kind of an explanation of things that you might do. What do you notice? How is it communicated? Why is it important? This list here in the how is it communicated, you might want to keep this with you. That's not a bad thing to have in your back pocket. All right, what kinds of things might I look for? Oh yeah, narrative pace. Okay, symbolism, sure. That sort of thing. And then why is it important? Of course, it always goes back to the thesis itself. All right, so I looked at the beginning. I said, Allworthy is a kind and decent man. That's what I notice when I see that. And I pulled up a whole bunch of, how do I know that? Well, his name, right? Starting with his name, Allworthy, right? He's all worthy of things, right? He is a worthy man. And we see the detail, right? And I have the thing about him praying, the perspective. Through his perspective, he beheld an infant in a sweet and profound sleep, right? That's his perspective that's kind of coming through. The detail, right? He's touched with sentiments of compassion. He's eager in contemplating the beauty of innocence. He was too much engaged to reflect that he was in his shirt, right? So he's kind of overcome with the beauty and the innocence of a small child. And the narration itself, something I don't know if you noticed or not, but his statements are embedded into the narration, right? It's only Mrs. Wilkins who talks with dialogue. His statements, it's all the narration, which I think lends some authority to that what he thinks is somehow should be a given. It should be the way it is. It's coming from the narrator. It's not coming from his mouth. Okay, so what? What does this have to do with the thesis? Well, Allworthy is presented as a moral authority whose wishes represent an ethical treatment for the child. We see that compassion that he has. Now, contrasting with the middle, with Mrs. Wilkins, there's a lot of ironic and cruel and ridiculous details. I will go ahead and let you read these for yourself. I'll say just a few of them. If you want to pause it and read the rest, that's fine. Take a screenshot, whatever. Some of the irony, right? Out of respect to him, she had spent many minutes in adjusting her hair, though her master, for aught she knew, lay expiring in apoplexy. Right? There's irony in there that she's more concerned about, out of respect, she's more concerned about the way she looks than the fact that he might be dying. We have kind of the ridiculous, she's in a most terrible fright after seeing him in only his shirt. I assume he's wearing pants too, but it doesn't really say. We get the reactions, the great horror, the judgmental stuff. The ironic thing she says, it's 2 to 1, but it lives till it is found in the morning, right? It's a pretty good chance, right? 2 out of 3. And some of that cruelty and self-servingness, right? And we see all that. So why does this matter? She expresses the legal and social ideas of the time. Talks about this illegal birth. That she should be whipped, right? Which would be a legal thing, and committed to Bridewell, which I assume is probably a convent or something like that. These are the kinds of things that were done. And so this is the prim, proper society way of doing things. And then finally, the end. Mr. Allworthy is oblivious to Miss Wilkins' protests and orders the morally correct thing to occur, right? And we see that in the details. Allworthy, would have been offended, but he strictly attended to, had he strictly attended to Wilkins. But he didn't. He was looking at the child, and the child grabs his hand, and the gentle pressure of that hand seems to implore Allworthy's assistance, and it certainly outpleaded the eloquence of Mrs. Deborah, had it been 10 times greater than it was. So, no matter what she said, that baby's hand grabbing onto his finger had a much bigger effect on him. And so why? So we see then at the end that moral compassion is presented as superior to legal and social judgment. And I think that that's kind of the meaning of this part of the text, or what we can take from it. That's a theme of it. And your thesis should always kind of aim towards a theme. No matter what you do, you're trying to make meaning of a text. All right? Well then, I will let you go with that. You have an assignment attached to this as well, and I hope you have a good weekend.